Good morning. My name is Kristen Peck, and I am the CEO of Lutheran Social Services of the National Capital Area. I want to thank you for joining us today for our annual Expressions of Abundance Day of Giving. I look forward to a day where we can do this in person again. Today, we look ahead with hope for a new chapter for LSS-NCA as we are emerging from a challenging time in our organization's 100-plus years of history. Because of you, we have been able to continue to serve the DC metro area even through the toughest of times. Our legacy of service wouldn't be possible without the generous support of our community and congregational partners throughout the years. This week, we moved out of the building where we've spent the last 30 years and into a brand new office space. This has meant I've spent much of the past few months, which were my first to LSS-NCA, in the dark storage room we refer to as the Batcave, paring down hundreds of legacy files, preparing to move into a space that's a quarter of the size of our previous office. And you thought the job of a CEO was glamorous. This process has been a great crash course for me in LSS-NCA history, which I will share with you. LSS was formed in 1917 by 7 Lutheran churches and hired its first CEO, female CEO, Bertha Higas, in 1924. During the Great Depression, LSS-NCA provided emergency assistance, food, and shelter to families who were destitute across the Washington, D.C. metro area. And after World War II, LSS-NCA opened its doors to persons who are fleeing persecution, war, and violence in their home countries. And this was the start of our refugee resettlement program. In the 1950s, we responded to the increasing need for forever homes for abandoned, abused, and neglected children by adding foster care and adoption services. And we grew these services in the 1980s to include unaccompanied refugee minors who are in need of safe and loving homes. During the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 1990s, LSS-NCA launched its Youth Haven Kids Camp for kids who'd been impacted by HIV/AIDS. It was the first and only program of its kind. LSS-NCA's refugee resettlement services have grown and evolved throughout the years to include new and emerging populations like Afghans and Iraqis who served alongside the U.S. military in missions in their home countries, putting their lives and those of their families at risk by terrorist groups because of their cooperation with the United States. And last year, at the start of the pandemic, LSS-NCA launched Care for Newcomers to serve persons seeking asylum in the United States. As you can see, throughout our history, we have evolved to respond to the changing needs of our communities, walking alongside them to offer hope and foster resiliency. We wouldn't be here without our strong community partnerships with congregations, individuals, local business, and other service organizations. The last 4 years have been some of the most challenging for those LSS-NCA serves, as restrictive policies significantly curtailed access to the U.S. refugee admissions program for those who needed it most. These policies devastated families awaiting reunification and left many in harm's way who are fleeing life or death situations with no knowledge of when they might be able to enter the United States. Those fleeing persecution and violence in the Northern Triangle were sent back by U.S. immigration officials to wait in Mexico while their asylum claims in the U.S. were being processed. This put them in further danger and, in some cases, death. The global pandemic devastated communities, and communities of color as well as refugee and immigrant communities were hit the hardest. And as the U.S. refugee program is systematically dismantled and the global pandemic wreaked havoc on our global community, LSS-NCA stripped down our organizational infrastructure. It is because you leaned in when we needed it most that LSS-NCA has persevered. Although it was a difficult year, we also had some success stories in 2020. Right before the pandemic, LSS-NCA launched Care for Newcomers to provide mental health services, Know Your Rights classes, and human trafficking screening and education to asylum seekers and other persons seeking humanitarian relief in the United States. LSS-NCA resettled more than 500 refugees in Maryland and Virginia, and 94% of them were Afghan special immigrant visa holders. We successfully placed over 300 adults in job placements around our regions. And we expanded our Healthy Relationships program with a new federal grant to serve 1,000 students in DC and Prince George's County. We converted many of our services and volunteer opportunities to a virtual and accessible platform, and we expanded our Unaccompanied Refugee Minor program to Virginia, allowing us to create loving and welcoming homes across our region for youth who've had to leave their families and homes behind due to persecution and war. Although we are all emerging from tough times, this next year signals a new chapter for LSS-NCA. We are focused on rebuilding our team. This will allow us to innovate and expand our programs, partnerships, and advocacy to respond to a global refugee crisis where a record number of almost 80 million people are forcibly displaced from their homes, and also to our community, which has suffered the devastating effects of the pandemic. Our Care for Newcomers program has already received 900% more referrals in the second quarter of this fiscal year than in the first quarter, following the repeal of the Remain in Mexico policies, and we expect this growth to continue. We just launched services to survivors of human trafficking or modern-day slavery to help them heal from their trauma, access services and benefits, and chart a pathway to immigration status. In this next year, we propose to add 2 new refugee resettlement sites in Baltimore County and in Frederick, Maryland, and to increase the capacity at our sites in Hyattsville, Maryland and Fairfax, Virginia, as part of a national response to welcome 125,000 refugees in 2022. We are proposing to expand our Unaccompanied Refugee Minor program to also serve children migrating across our borders. And we plan to rejuvenate our adoption program to provide home studies to people seeking to provide forever homes to children in need, and break the seal post-adoption services to those wishing to reunify with birth families. We thank you for boldly supporting us through your generous donations and volunteering. You made a choice to open your home to refugee youth, to befriend new Americans, to donate your couches and table sets to furnish a newly arrived family's home, to send your child to our virtual Youth Haven summer camp or Healthy Relationships education, and to give your time and your money in support of our mission. Now is your opportunity to be a part of a more welcoming America. By investing in LSS-NCA, you are helping create the world that you want to see.